falar. Bom dia a todos que estão assistindo aí. A gente vai começar em 30 segundos aqui. Obrigado aí pela audiência. Okay, so, well, I'll make the introduction in English, also just to. Good morning, all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Se alguém quiser o aparelho de tradução, a gente tem ali fora simultânea, tá? It's an honor to have you here today, today's morning, Saturday morning. We're very glad to see our crowded event here. We're very honored to have Professor Walden Bello here with us. Thanks a lot for having some time to spend with us here. We are a non-profit institution, a bookstore, a library, and a cultural center, and we have already established a tradition of discussions on international affairs and politics and global politics, and we believe they are fundamental, essential during this period we are facing of extreme dangers and extreme challenges to democracies and to the well-being of civilizations around the world. So thanks a lot for your presence. Professor Walden Bello is currently professor of sociology in the State University of New York. He has served as a member of the Representative Chamber, the Parliament of Philippines from 2009 to 2015. He has received a number of very important international awards, and it's a PhD from Princeton in 1975. He's the author or co-author of 23 books, and he's also an engaged intellectual. He's also an activist, someone we really have full of admiration for his biography and trajectory. So, Professor, please, thank you for coming, and you have the floor. No.
So this is simultaneous translation. Okay, sure. And I will make sure to not speak too fast. Yeah. So I'd like to thank the organizers of this event. I'd like to thank you for inviting us here. And all of you who have come here today, preferring to be subjected to torture instead of relaxing on a Saturday morning. But I can assure you the torture will be pleasant. Okay? Given your interest in the subject matter. So I would just like to go through initially a PowerPoint presentation that will last for about 35 to 40 minutes. And then after that, we can have a question and answer. And I am here as much to learn as to share some of my insights into the global situation. I have come to Brazil and I attended two conferences in Itaipava, near Rio, on the current global situation. And I have taken advantage of my 10 days in Brazil to investigate the political situation here, what gave rise to it, and what is the future. And over the last several days, I have been interviewing a number of experts and analysts of the situation in Brazil. One of them, of course, being Ladislav here, who we were at his very beautiful home yesterday. And I have been assisted by a fellow Filipino who is here, Cecilia Leros. Cecilia, can you stand up? oh, they're not here. And then one of my comrades who works with me in the Philippines in an organization called People Struggle, I also met her here. She's doing some studies at the university. So let me begin. So the rapid rise of the extreme right in what used to be regarded as stable democracies in the North over the last decade has been one of the two biggest political shocks of the last generation. The other being the collapse of the socialist governments of Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union 2 decades earlier. In just 8 years, 2010 to 2018, the world has seen the extreme right move from being outside the corridors of power to the center of power itself. There is, of course, Donald Trump, but before his surprise electoral victory in November 2016, Viktor Orban had come to power again in Hungary in 2010, this time reincarnated as a man of the hard right instead of the liberal Democrat he was in the late 1990s. And after Trump, the Alternative for Deutschland won 94 of the German Bundestag's 630 seats in the September 2017 elections. The first time the far right has gained a presence in that body, and the anti-immigrant Northern League came to power in alliance with the Five Star Movement in Italy in the aftermath of the March 2018 elections. So the question is, why this big shock that surprised so many people, not only Francis Fukuyama, who had predicted that after 1989, the world was going to be dominated by liberal democracies. Now, in a speech in Johannesburg last year, and I know that Obama is seen by many of us as part of the problem, former US President Obama noted that, quote, challenges to globalization first came from the left, but then came more forcefully from the right, as you started seeing populist movements that tapped the unease that was felt by many people who lived outside the urban cores, fears that economic security was slipping away, that their social status and privileges were eroding, that their cultural identities were being threatened by outsiders, somebody that did not look like them or sound like them or pray as they did. Now, Obama's words underline an interesting development, that the right ate the left's lunch, as the Americans would say it. The left's critique of neoliberalism and globalization took off in the mid-1980s in the context of two struggles. In the South, it unfolded as part and parcel of the opposition to structural adjustment in developing countries imposed by the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. In the North, the anti-globalization movement was triggered by two developments. One was the drive of transnational corporations to relocate their facilities to Mexico and East Asia and to take advantage of cheap labor, a trend that accelerated with China's integration into the global capitalist economy in the 1980s. It was also a response to the determined efforts of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher to drastically emasculate labor and deregulate and denationalize the US and British economies in the early 1980s. Now, the establishment of the North American Free Trade Area in 1994 and the World Trade Organization in 1995 added fuel to the spread of the anti-globalization or altered globalization movement, which helped to derail the third ministerial of the World Trade Organization in December 1999 in Seattle. Seattle was an exclusively left-wing affair, as were the protests against the Group of Eight that culminated in a massive 200,000-person rally in Genoa in July 2001. Now, with the outbreak of the global financial crisis in 2008, after the hiatus of 9/11, the anti-globalization movement reemerged in force in the North in what came to be known as the Occupy movement, the key political products of which were the coming to power of Syriza in Greece and the rise of Podemos as a political force in Spain. Now, the left's ability to ride on the anti-globalization agenda, however, was severely compromised by the fact that since the 1990s, the center-left in the US and Europe had bought into and aggressively promoted the neoliberal agenda. Thus, in the United States, it was under the leadership of the Democratic Clinton administration that NAFTA and the WTO came into being, and the New Deal era Glass-Steagall Act separating commercial from investment banking was repealed. Later, in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, Obama's Democratic presidency prioritized saving the banks instead of bringing relief to millions of bankrupt homeowners, then, in what must rank as a historic misjudgment, promoted the Trans-Pacific Partnership that, to the working class, especially the white working class in the US, meant a continuation of the export of their jobs to China. In the United Kingdom, New Labour pushed the third way, a key element of which was support for the thoroughgoing financial liberalization and state support for the drive to make London supplant New York as a global financial center. In Germany, the Social Democrats, SPD, under Gerhard Schroeder, did what the center-right Christian Democrats could never have accomplished, pushed neoliberal, quote-unquote, reforms, the so-called Hartz reforms, that loosened wage, tenure, and social security protections for workers. French socialist figures, for their part, became the most enthusiastic proponents of the euro, the adoption of which required countries to maintain tight expansionary fiscal policies that militated against social spending. Having embraced the neoliberal agenda, the established workers' parties, or broad left parties, became defenders of globalization, leading not only to failure to expand their mass base, but also to part of that base leaving their ranks, like the leaders and rank and file that left the SPD in Germany in the mid-2000s and helped form Die Linke, the left in Germany. Okay. How the right expropriated the anti-globalization agenda. Even as the mainstream left failed to capitalize on the ills of globalization and neoliberalism, around which the independent left had built a strong critique to expand its domestic base, the extreme right was detaching itself from the neoliberal agenda that it had formerly supported along with the center right. In the US, for instance, Donald Trump broke with the Republican Party and big business when he opposed the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, that they almost unanimously endorsed. And when he came to power in January of 2017, one of the two first executive orders of Trump was in fact to ban US participation in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which had been pushed by the Obama administration to the consternation of many workers in the United States. Seeking to make inroads into the working class, right-wing parties in Europe gradually abandoned the emphasis on anti-tax, anti-big government, and free market concerns of their original petty bourgeois base and opportunistically embraced an anti-neoliberal agenda and the welfare state. According to a prominent socialist senator, and I quote, "Left-wing voters are crossing the red line because they think that salvation from their plight is embodied by Madame Le Pen, Marine Le Pen, who is the head of the National Front. They say no to a world that seems hard, globalized, implacable. These are working class people, pensioners, office workers who say, quote, we don't want this capitalism and competition in a world where Europe is losing its leadership." Stealing the left's working class base by opposing parts of the neoliberal program and defending the welfare state became the extreme right's passport to power or to the antechamber of power throughout Europe. In Denmark, the People's Party broke with its parent group's anti-tax focus, becoming instead a defender of that country's generous public sector, provided that its benefits would be limited to Danes. Norway's Progress Party followed suit, so did the Freedom Party in Austria. Raiding the left's base has accelerated in all of Europe since the 1990s, but it has been in Hungary that the right has not only stolen the left's base, but stolen its thunder. Aside from restoring economic growth and stability, Viktor Orban concedes an otherwise critical article in the Financial Times, quote, curb the foreign multinationals that brought national assets cheaply in the 1990s privatizations, restoring Hungarian majority control of the banking sector, and help mend public finances without imposing orthodox austerity measures, unlike, unquote, his social democratic predecessor government. Is it okay? Okay. A massive boost for the extreme right was provided by global financial crisis of 2008 and the deep recession it triggered, from which the US had a weak recovery during the Obama administration, and Europe has not yet recovered. The extreme right blamed the economic collapse on the neoliberal and pro-globalization policies of the center-left and center-right, and confirmed their decision to expropriate left-wing concerns as being the correct strategy. Now, since its early days as a common market, the European Union has suffered from a democratic deficit. That is, a lack of accountability of its central agencies to the citizens of the different nation states that form it. There is a European Parliament, but that is a late innovation, and its power is a mere shadow of that of the unelected technocracy that runs the economic machine of the EU from Brussels. For the European right, denouncing this democratic deficit has been one of its instruments to hijack the popular base of the left. While the center-left and center-right across Europe were unable to address the reality of democracy playing second fiddle to the technocracy, having been involved in the construction of the European Union, European Central Bank, and the Eurozone, the extreme right was able to seize the high ground, presenting itself as the champion of national sovereignty against national encroachment, unquote, democracy, unquote, against technocracy. Nowhere was the successful appropriation of left-wing causes more in display that when Marine Le Pen came out in defense of the results of the referendum called by Greece's left-wing Syriza government, saying, and I quote, "The European Union mocks and brushes aside the popular wish expressed in the Greek elections, and it seeks to impose a policy of austerity, the continuity of a policy of austerity which the Greek people no longer want," unquote. She asked rhetorically, quote, confronted with the choice, who will win, democracy or Euro dictatorship? Outmaneuvering the left by hijacking its critique of neoliberalism and globalization and taking the lead in denouncing the democratic deficit in the European Union were two key ingredients in the ascendancy of the far right. What made the brew toxic, however, was the mixing of these themes with racism and nativism, which were fueled by primordial fears that whites or people of European stock were in danger of being outnumbered by non-white migrants. In the 1930s, this cherry-picking of left-wing concerns with equality and social welfare and their reformulation within a racial or extreme nationalist paradigm produced National Socialism. Today, the extreme right's message is not dissimilar. Quote, yes, a welfare state, but only for whites or people of European stock, unquote. Part of the effectiveness of the right's message is the way it is diffused, which pushes class and racial buttons within a conspiratorial narrative. EU policies favoring the banks had bought on the financial crisis. Then the EU placed the brunt of repaying the debt on working people through austerity policies, even as it opened Europe to migrants to compete for the few jobs and limited social services available. In this narrative, the established parties of the center-left and center-right were complicit, either complicit in this policy dictated from on high from Brussels, or they had lost touch with the masses. It was a winning narrative that served as a euphemistic cloak to a sinister synthesis of primordial racial, ethnic, cultural, and religious solidarities that trumped the old solidarity of the working class with marginalized communities. In the US, the Tea Party narrative was that the liberal elites in Washington bailed out the banks at the expense of the people, shipped jobs abroad and destroyed communities, and allowed vast numbers of immigrants in who took white people's jobs or forced down their wages. This uncontrolled migration was making the dominant ethnic stock the minority in its own turf. What is marked, according to Siblat and Levitsky, is, quote, the rise of a discourse that distinguishes real Americans from those associated with liberals and the Democratic Party. If the definition of, quote, real Americans is restricted to those who are native-born, English-speaking, white, and Christian, then it is easy to see how, quote, real Americans, unquote, may view themselves as declining, unquote. So takeaways from this first part of the presentation. First, the extreme right-wing movements are the most dynamic political forces in the global north today. Second, part of the success of these movements has stemmed from their ability to seize the anti-globalization and parts of the anti-neoliberal agenda that was originally articulated by the independent left. Third, a major boost to the fortunes of the extreme right was the global financial crisis and the deep recession it provoked in the US and Europe, which they blamed on neoliberal and pro-globalization policies of both the center-left and the center-right. Fourth, another key reason for the right-wing success was its seizing on the anti-EU banner, championing national sovereignty against supranational encroachment and democracy against technocratic dictatorship. Brexit is, of course, the most prominent example of the right success in this area. Fifth, the central issue on which the extreme right rode, however, was that of opposition to immigration, which won over significant sectors of the working class into a narrative that depicted the dominant elites in Europe and the liberal elite in the United States as conspiring to flood their countries with non-white migrants that would take away jobs and social services from the majority community. Finally, these movements do not primarily stem from classical class conflict, but they merit the term counter-revolutionary owing to the fact that they are fundamentalist and comprehensive political responses to a range of threats felt by their mass base. While often inchoate and made out of disparate elements owing to their leaders' opportunistic efforts to reach out to new constituencies, this counter-revolutionary project is cemented by primordial solidarities of race, religion, and culture. In contrast to the situation in the North, the extreme right has not broken with neoliberalism in the global South. In India, the BJP, headed by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, has continued the neoliberal economic policies of successive governments since the early 1990s and draws its support from the Indian bourgeoisie and middle classes that have been beneficiaries of these policies. The engine of extreme right politics is Hindu nationalism. In the Philippines, the economic policies of Rodrigo Duterte are solidly neoliberal. Candidate Duterte made noises against mining and the World Trade Organization, yet, like his posture towards mining, it has been all talk. Rather than anti-neoliberal sentiments, the source of the popularity of Duterte's politics is his anti-crime and anti-corruption agenda. What I would like to focus on, however, is the deeper dynamics of the far right in the global South, beyond their relationship to neoliberalism. This was the subject of a comparative study I did in 2017 and 2018. This study focused on extreme right-wing movements that successfully seized power in Indonesia in 1965 to 66, Chile during the Allende period, contemporary Thailand, India, and the Philippines. I also included fascist Italy in the early 1920s because it had characteristics that were similar to those of the post-World War II societies of the Global South. From these case studies, I would like to advance a couple of theses. Thesis 1 on two kinds of counter-revolution. My first thesis is that the far-right movements in both the Global South and the Global North can best be understood as, quote, counter-revolutions. And the best paradigm for understanding them is the dialectic of revolution and counter-revolution. In this regard, there are two types of counter-revolution that have emerged in the study. One is the class-driven counter-revolution, which is principally a response by threatened classes to a revolutionary challenge from below. This is clearly the case in fascist Italy in the early 1920s, Indonesia in the 1960s, Chile in the 1970s, and Thailand today. Then there is the revolution that is principally directed at overturning a liberal, democratic, secular, and pluralistic order. It is a total counter-revolution that has transformative goals at the levels of the ideological, cultural, political, social, and economic. This is the case in India and the Philippines, and for that matter, far-right movements in contemporary United States and Europe. This is two. A second lesson is that while the class-driven counter-revolution can best be understood by a paradigm in which the revolution-counter-revolution dialectic is the centerpiece, the perceived revolutionary threat may not be a takeover by an armed insurgency, but a progressive movement that is able to use the law and establish institutions to promote social reform. This was the case in fascist Italy, Indonesia, Allende's Chile, and Thailand today. A third lesson is that the middle class has often been the pivot around which politics revolves in times of great fluidity. The middle class is notoriously volatile. Under certain circumstances, such as the rule of a socially isolated dictatorship like the Suchinda military dictatorships in Thailand in the early 1990s, and the Marcos regime in the Philippines, it can play a progressive role in pushing democratization. But when it feels its status and economic interests are challenged from below by insurgent lower classes, the middle class can become the mass base of counter-revolution, allying itself with the elites to form a formidable political force. Brazil was too late to be included in my study, but I'd like to pose the question, is this the case with the middle class here today? Fourth, where the state is weak, lacking in legitimacy, or slow to take action owing to constitutional considerations, threatened elites resort to fascist paramilitary groups to protect or advance their interests. In relation to these groups, selected agencies of weak states, such as states with a firmer constitutional framework that restricts the freedom of parts of the state apparatus, do not remain neutral, but lend either active or passive support to them. On the other hand, where the state, especially the repressive agencies, is strong, it usually directs the final stage of the counter-revolution, that is, the physical elimination of the leftist enemy from above, using civilian groups mainly as junior partners. This is 5. Fifth, force and violence are among the counter-revolutionaries' preferred strategy, even when the opposing side is following a strategy of gradual reform. Fascist Italy, Indonesia, and Chile are clear examples. The intensity of violence, however, may descend on a number of factors, the most important of which appears to be how immediate the existential threat posed by the left is felt by the right. Where the threat from the left is assessed to be one of slow asphyxiation of the ruling elite and its allies via gradual electoral advances, as in fascist Italy, the counter-revolutionaries can calibrate violence, and even as they threaten its indiscriminate use to terrorize the left into submission. Where the right has convinced itself that the threat of leftist seizure of power is imminent, its response is likely to be massive, widespread, intense, even indiscriminate violence, as in Indonesia and Chile. On the democratic elections on the far right, in a number of cases, the extreme right, while addicted to force and violence, comes to power through elections. Democracy, in other words, can be an enabler of authoritarianism. Once in power, however, the extreme right dismantles many of the institutions of liberal democracy and alters the electoral regime to install itself permanently in power. While violence is a central element in the right-wing repertoire, the popular basis of counter-revolutionary regimes must not be underestimated. Duterte's killing of some 20,000 people in 3 years has been supported or tolerated by the vast majority of Filipinos. One must, however, distinguish, quote, the active consensus of the middle class from the passive consensus of the lower classes. Thesis 7, on scapegoating and eliminationism. 7, counter-revolutionary movements target certain groups as the disruptors of order or the corruptors of social purity, the favorites being minorities in the case of the majoritarian counter-revolution and communists or corrupt populists in that of the class-based counter-revolution. In some cases, the targeted group is seen as more than a scapegoat and is ideologically deconstructed into vermin stripped of all humanity and deserving of elimination or systematic repression. Jews in Nazi Germany, communists in Indonesia, and drug users in the Philippines fall into this category. In other cases, as with Muslims in India, according to some observers, the strategy may not be the elimination of a minority, but their reduction into a tightly controlled inferior status, one that is enforced by occasional lynchings or when the opportunity presents itself with pogroms. As the Gujarat Riots in India revealed, the Hindu Nationalist Syndicate is perfectly capable of carrying out physical extermination when the opportunity presents itself. In Gujarat in 2002, there were massive riots that ended with about 3,000 Muslims being killed. The chief minister of that state then, was Narendra Modi, and he was, in fact, denied visa to enter the United States for many years because the State Department had classified him as the mastermind of the Gujarat riots. However, when he became prime minister in 2014, Modi was embraced by President Obama. How should we respond to the rise of the right? There are no easy solutions. Perhaps in the question and answer period, we can collectively shed light on this urgent question. Now, this presentation is based on 2 books coming out in July 2019. The first is Counter-Revolution, The Global Rise of the Far Right, which is being put out by Fernwood. Paper Dragons, China in the Next Crash, which is Zed is putting out this year. So I would like to thank you very much. That is a short, abbreviated presentation, but I'm sure that many of you would probably want to add a few things. Add your insights, and maybe we can have a really collective discussion which would benefit all of us, and hopefully we can look back at the event today as part of a process by which we have collectively tried internationally to pose a challenge to this very dynamic right-wing movements that are on the move throughout the world today, both in the global north and the global south. Thank you.
So thank you, Professor. Many thanks for your brilliant presentation here. We're very proud to have this morning debate here. Então vamos abrir para conversa, para perguntas, para intervenções, críticas ou angústias, né? Angústias já são muitas, né? Tá bom.
Português, tá bom. Tá bom. Bom dia, professor. Muito interessante a sua análise histórica. Eu queria saber também como o senhor vê a emergência das mídias sociais nesse contexto, da emergência da direita. A revista Mother Jones, este mês, fez uma reportagem muito interessante mostrando, decupando como é que as mídias sociais, a extrema-direita, os jovens, sobretudo, usam as mídias sociais para influenciar o ambiente cultural, e o título dizia: a esquerda não consegue produzir memes. Fazendo a crítica do fato de que a esquerda não está conseguindo usar essa ferramenta. Enfim, o resumo eu gostaria de saber como é que você vê a questão das mídias sociais nessa consolidação dessa nova direita em todo o mundo.
Professor Walden Bello, é uma satisfação ouvir a sua palestra. Eu sou Gilberto Maringoni, eu sou professor da Universidade Federal do ABC. A minha pergunta é a seguinte: no caso brasileiro, nós estamos tendo um governo de extrema-direita que se move pelo discurso contra a corrupção, um discurso da Guerra Fria anticomunista e um discurso moralizante, a moral das famílias, a moral das pessoas e tal. E faz uma guerra ideológica muito profunda, muito eficiente para seduzir a opinião pública. Ao mesmo tempo, o programa aplicado é um programa neoliberal muito profundo que piora a situação da vida das pessoas. O desemprego tem aumentado, as condições de vida têm piorado. Como é que o senhor vê esse apelo de massa, esse apelo popular que tem a extrema-direita com a piora das condições de vida? Nós vamos chegar a um ponto de mutação, a um turning point, aí, de virada? Como é que o senhor vê esse futuro agora com a emergência de uma crise mundial que pode ser mais profunda que a de 2008? Obrigado.
Mais uma? Mais alguém? Você?
Boa tarde já. Meu nome é Tiago, sou professor também na AMB Morumbi. A pergunta é a seguinte: o senhor colocou de forma bem interessante que, enquanto a centro-esquerda e a centro-direita elas estavam preocupadas no discurso institucional, que é um discurso sistêmico, a extrema-direita ela apresentou um discurso antissistêmico. E nessa ideia de uma ascensão de um novo populismo, que ele busca colocar, né, a oposição muito clara junto ao sistema, ele se coloca como antissistêmico e sustenta a própria base dela na legitimação social, se colocando como outsider. O senhor vê isso como uma estruturação de um novo populismo, de um populismo contemporâneo? E o senhor acredita que exista alguma maneira dessa polarização conseguir se manter em um largo período de tempo, ou ela tende a um esgarçamento próprio? Obrigado.
Ok.
Thank you for the questions. They're, of course, extremely important questions. And on the first, the social media, I think it is without doubt that the social media have played a very important role in the mobilization of the base of the right, and it's reaching out to new forces. And it is also very clear that the more progressive liberal forces have been very late in adapting to this. For instance, the Congress Party in India, which used to be the dominant party and had a secular, progressive, pluralist perspective, its constituency in the social media was outnumbered something like 10 times by the BJP network in the social media, and so people were really wondering what happened here. Is it that the left and progressives and liberals were just too, how would you put it now? They were caught napping, Is it because they were mainly reliant on the established media, the newspapers and the television? So there are a number of issues that are raised with respect to this. However, I think there are limitations to the narrative or the explanation that the creation of the right-wing base was mainly something that was manipulated by the social media specialists of the right. I think that what happened really was the priority of politics here. There were a lot of discontent within the basis of the right and their potential base. And my sense is that the leaders of the far right that emerged, whether it was in the global north or global south, were able to present alternatives to these people that exposed to their needs, spoke to their biases, spoke to their concerns. And I think that, therefore, we really need to look at social conflicts rather than as something that was manipulated and artificially created. I know that there's a lot of talk about trolls, the people who are hired to counter progressive ideas. But I would say that in our own experience in the Philippines, yes, there are trolls. But many of those people who come in defense of Duterte are passionate people, ordinary middle class, lower middle class people. And you can see that even if their logic has, somersaulting logic, they just want to dispute you and to engage in a battle, ideological battle with you. I have a veteran of internet wars, and I would say that 80% of the people I engage in social media, in ideological and political battles, are not trolls. Because you can see that the trolls, they have some formulas, and after a while, they are not sustained. But the true believers are the ones, that we should be worried about. And I think the true believers are the ones that are the most active in social media at this point in time, while we should not discount the fact that at decisive points, during electoral periods, for instance, the activity of organized trolls can make a difference. And I don't know whether that was the case in Brazil, but certainly at decisive points, organized trolling can make a big difference. But I don't think we should rely on that as the principal explanation for the emergence of a heated right-wing mass base. A question that was posed by Professor Mangoni of the ABC University. Well, I think at least as of this point, my sense is that, as I put it here, the difference between the extreme right in the global south and the extreme right in the global north is, in the global north, they have already broken with the classical neoliberal agenda. They have embraced the themes and concerns of the left. Of course, this is all very opportunistic, but I think that they have distanced themselves from the center right. Now, the big challenge, I think, in the north is, as of now, I think it is fair to say that the parties of the left, whether whether it is the independent left or the mainstream left, the Social Democrats, are still in a state of paralysis. Okay? They are seeing their people move away to opportunistic right-wing parties. And at the moment, they are still in political confusion. I think the SPD in Germany, the only response it has to the current situation is to be a junior partner of the Christian Democrats. Okay, there was a big debate. In Germany, in the SPD, it seems like the only response is to the current situation is to be a junior partner of the Christian Democrats. And there was a big debate leading up to the German elections whether the SPD should decisively cut off from the grand coalition with the Christian Democrats that it had over the last decade. And at first, people thought, oh my God, this is really going to happen. And in fact, the head of the SPD was saying, yes, we are now going to be an independent, we're going to cut our ties to Angela Merkel. But, you know, in the few months leading up to the elections, it began again its old role as a junior partner. And I think that I think that the fact that the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, had such a powerful showing, okay, over 90 seats in the Bundestag, when it was not present at all in the past, is partly, I think, the fact that many workers just got so disillusioned that here was the old neoliberal pro-globalization coalition again, and the same old faces of the SPD and Angela Merkel. So I think that's been the situation. So again, I would like to say that, and in France, I think the socialists and the other parties of the left, continued to exist in a state of disarray. When Macron was elected in the second round in 2017, and I could see on television that there was this wide range of people saying, "Oh, we have saved democracy. We have saved democracy." For some reason, I was deeply convinced that the politics he represented would not last in terms of its appeal. And that I saw 2017, I worried that 2017 was merely a step forward to Marine Le Pen's presidency in 2022. And these worries, of course, have been fanned recently by the way that Macron has become so unpopular because of the way that he has dealt with the Yellow Vest movement. And my sense is that the Yellow Vest movement can go either way. It can go to the left or it can go to the right. But I think that there is a very great danger that politically it will be harvested by the right, although we still have to see whether that's going to happen. Now, in terms of the Global South, yes, you have this interesting situation whereby people like Modi, apparently people like Bolsonaro, people like Duterte, have solidly neoliberal political economic programs, which is just going to worsen the situation. Although rhetorically they might have pick something like I'm anti-mining or I am against the WTO, nevertheless, you know, they tend to have solid neoliberal technocratic advisors. And when Duterte is asked about economic questions, he says, I don't understand economics, which is why my neoliberal advisors, my advisors here will take care of it. And so the people who have the most secure tenure in Duterte's cabinet are the economic people, the one who run the economic development, finance, etc. And this is, you know, when there are arguments about economic policy in the cabinet meeting, according to one cabinet minister I talked to, what Duterte does is he just runs 6 years. And then after they finish, he says, you guys take care of that. I don't understand that. You guys, you know, take care of that. So, so my sense is that that, you know, with the solution that these people offer is just more of the same poverty, more of the same inequality, more of the same economic stagnation. But we should not underestimate how even if the economic status of people are not improving or are declining, there's still this hope among them that will not look at the facts but look at the possibilities that they think are opened up by their election of a new leadership. Because these people, whether it's Modi or Duterte and other people, they have come to power with a very strong, not only anti-left, anti-progressive, but anti-political stance. You know, that, you know, all of these political parties in the past, you know, politicians are the problem. Okay? Politicians are the problem, and they won't bring you anything, so let's try our approach. And our approach is a direct communication with the people. And you will be, you know, I will bring you along in terms of our quest. So, so my sense is there might be, you know, like right now, 2013, in the Philippines, we have elections in May. The economy has been bad. Inflation has, especially last year, you know, was quite high. People were complaining. But going into the elections, what we face is that Duterte has 80% approval rating. 80% approval rating. You know, this is unheard of. After 3 years, usually you would say that, oh my God, people have begun, as with past presidents, it's dipped down, and he would have down in the 40s or 50s right now. But 80%, this is amazing, okay? And it's because I think his main issue is the main problem of the Philippines are criminals, they're the drug users, and I will get rid of these people. And then people say, and after he does that, after he shows that he has a strong hand with respect to criminals, he is going to clean up, get rid of the corrupt people, and bring us to an economic kind of nirvana. So basically, I think the image of a strong person who means business can override the actual economic realities of people. But the other side to that, of course, is that we on the progressive movement in the Philippines, we on the left, have not been able to offer up a convincing counter-narrative, okay? Some of us attack inflation. Oh, he's created inflation. Some of us say that, you know, he's inconsistent. He attacked the WTO. Now he's now for eliminating the quota on rice, which will kill our rice industry. But we have not been able to offer a convincing counter narrative, apart from the fact that we're also quite split up at this point in time. So there is a very big challenge there. There is glimmers of hope in the coming elections that formerly labor federations that were not able to work together have come together on a common labor slate. But this is just one small glimmer of hope. The other side to this is that in the Senate elections, his candidates do not have any program except to say that we are loyal to him and elect people who are loyal to Duterte. And it doesn't matter what the program is. Even his daughter, Sara Duterte, has said, honesty is not the important thing. It's loyalty to my father. Okay? So, who's going to win in the current elections? Maybe the opposition will be lucky to have one person, in the Senate slate that wins. So it's really a really big challenge. So I guess my response here is we really have to, one, unite our forces on the left, and secondly, we have to have a very convincing counter-narrative. And if we can cooperate internationally to be able to formulate that, I think that it would really be a step forward. Certainly, we in the progressive movement in the Philippines would like your help, okay, in doing this. And I think international exchanges like this, I think, are very useful in terms of figuring out where we go from here. In terms of what you raised, Professor, the importance of, did you say, let me see now, if you could repeat your question about social legitimation again so I can more properly respond to it.
Português, né? A questão era que enquanto a centro-direita e a centro-esquerda, quando o senhor se referia ao norte global, estavam dentro de um discurso institucional, nesse ponto, então, o senhor colocou que a direita esquerda, elas estavam apresentando um discurso institucional sistêmico, a direita, a extrema-direita, aparece com um discurso antissistêmico. E dentro da lógica da ascensão do populismo, na visão aí da MUF, do Laclau, de você ter que localizar quem que é o seu inimigo para poder, a partir disso, fazer um discurso que vai, então, angariar a massa popular, a extrema-direita focaliza no sistema, né? A extrema-direita ela vai utilizar o discurso antissistêmico. O senhor acredita que isso, então, sustenta uma nova roupagem do populismo contemporâneo que está sendo...
presenting itself in the global affairs.
Yeah.
E essa e se acredita que essa oposição tem condições de se sustentar, porque ela depende de uma oposição muito forte entre os dois polos. Existe, na sua visão, sustentabilidade nisso?
Is this kind of position statement sustainable in the medium term, long term?
This is a very interesting question. Yes, definitely the far right has presented itself as outsiders, that they are anti-system, that politics, liberal democratic politics, is hopelessly corrupt, and that we are the people who are the outsiders. As Trump would say, we will come and drain the swamp. Okay. And so this image of draining the swamp, or this idea of draining the swamp, is a common theme among all these right-wing, extreme right-wing politicians. Sometimes they do not use the image of the swamp. Sometimes they use the image of the broom. But what I would just like to say here is that, again, the advantage of the extreme right over the left is they are very opportunistic in terms of the ideas they bring together. The ideas may have many contradictions, but they're not worried about rational coherence. They are worried about emotional coherence. And it is the emotional coherence that is both their weakness, both their advantage and their power. So if we fight them at the level of a discourse based on reason and logic, which is the only way that we can advance forward, we should not expect that their responses will be at the level of a coherent discourse, because what they really are after is the power of emotional logic that brings together disparate ideas, but in an emotionally satisfying way. And that has always been, I think, the advantage of the right, that the left cannot engage in that sort of thing. For better or for worse, all groups within the left, whether it's in the global north or the global south, are still very much children of the Enlightenment. But things should not really end there. The second thing I would just like to say is it sustainable? Well, this is an interesting question, because I've been reflecting recently that if you, in terms of the longevity of fascist regimes that do have a social base, the Franco dictatorship lasted for about 40 years. That's a long time. The Salazar dictatorship in Portugal also lasted somewhat along the same lines. Okay? And when we look at, now I'll go back to the 20th century, one of the things that has always astounded people, but of course is not a subject of much discussion in Germany, is, even in the midst of the heaviest Allied bombing of Germany from 1941 to 1945, this did not break the loyalty of the masses of German people to Hitler. Okay? Even when the Russians were advancing, even when the generals made their attempts at an assassination, they were very much solidly in the ideological attraction posed by Nazism. Okay? And, Gunter Grass is the first to say this, as a young high school student, okay, he joined the SS, or an SS unit. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that even when they have contradictory policies, even when they have economic policies that are harmful, let us not underestimate their ability to be able to present a winning narrative. And sometimes we on the left have a very economistic view that if things are going bad economically, this is going to mean they won't last in power that long. I think it is the way they're able to capture the narrative in people's minds that is really key, and which we really need to focus on by creating a counter-narrative that is more powerful and much more attractive to the people. The last thing I would just like to say, of course, is that I would say that even as I talk about mass appeal, I would say that there is a class basis for these regimes, and that the middle class is their mass base, okay? The middle class is their mass base, and I know that in sociology, people used to talk about the middle class as the base of democratization. Marx focused mainly on the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, because those were the two poles that made capitalism move forward. Insofar as the middle strata was concerned, Marx did not attribute much agency to the middle class. He just thought that they would respond to the initiatives of either the proletariat or the bourgeoisie. So the middle class has been the great understudied class. And yet, in times of great crisis, it's the middle class that steps forward and moves things to the right. Of course, it's in alliance with the elites. But without the mass base of the middle class, I don't think we would have extreme right movements, that can move in the way that they have been able to do so. I'm very concerned about this because I did my doctoral dissertation on the counter-revolution in Chile against Allende. And there's a very disturbing interpretation of that period, which I really think does us a political disservice and a theoretical disservice. The interpretation is that it was an alliance between the military and the elites and the CIA that brought down Allende, okay? Yes, they had that role, but really it was the middle class bursting into the political scene in a counter-revolutionary fashion against the Unidad Popular and being manipulated and manipulating. That was the main motive force of that counter-revolution that ended in September 11, 1973. And I think scholarship tends to erase this. It was mainly an elite affair and the CIA and the Chilean military. But I think that I would say that the central dynamic was the middle-class counter-revolution. And it's only in that context that the CIA and the Chilean elite could be effective in terms of the way that they helped bring down Allende. So, in short, let us not, and we should focus more of our theoretical and political energies in understanding how the middle class behaves, especially in terms of crisis. Thank you.
Do we have time for another round? Yeah, okay. So we have time for another round here. Momento. Professor Fábio, e depois 1, 2, 3, pode ser?
4. Fala em inglês, então. good morning. My name is Fabio. I'm also professor at Federal University of São Paulo. I have been a historian. I find some methodological difficulties with the construction that you propose, particularly like comparing political events that took place in the 20s, then in the 60s, 70s, and then contemporary ones. But I'm not going to delve into that because then I would have to read your work, which I have not. But just this is just a remark. Just like the clearest difficulty is the fact that counter-revolution in the 60s, 70s was obviously a class affair, as you said, and currently this is not really the issue, except from the Thailand case, which I'm not familiar with, but you brought about it. So. So the questions that I want to bring on, two questions. The first is, you presented a very interesting connection between left governments or center-left governments embracing the neoliberal global agenda and what you're calling as a counter-revolution that came later on. So the question is, who do you picture as the political agents of change in that scenario? Because I understand that we cannot then just go back to these very old parties who brought us to this current situation. So let's say the French are not going back to the socialists who brought them to Macron and Le Pen. So what were the lessons that you see on that? And the second, I would really be interested on listening to you a little more on the Philippines context, since the little that you said, you brought just so many interesting similarities to what we're facing in Brazil, but we know, or at least I know little. So I would be particularly interested on knowing a little bit more of the background that brought Duterte to power, in the sense that on the narrative that you suggested, like there was a failure of left alternatives helped to bring on the context to this right-wing alternatives, and we could see that on the Brazilian scenario, for example. So I would like to know a little bit more, or have a little bit more your take on the Philippines.
Okay, we're going to take one more, and then we go back.
Bom dia, meu nome é Patrícia, eu também sou professora da Universidade Federal de São Paulo. A minha pergunta é bem... Sorry. O senhor consegue? Meu nome é Patrícia, eu sou professora da Universidade Federal de São Paulo. Também sou membro do Vigência, que é esse coletivo que está também na organização. A minha pergunta é bem pontual. Eu queria que o senhor só falasse um pouquinho mais sobre a tese 4, quando o senhor trata do Estado fraco. Qual que é o papel do Estado? Eu imagino que é central nessa discussão do surgimento da extrema-direita o papel do Estado. E é uma diferença bem grande, né, de como o Estado, por exemplo, no Brasil, hoje, ele se apresenta e na Europa, nos Estados Unidos. Então, eu queria que o senhor falasse um pouquinho mais dessa tese 4, mais em especial. Obrigada.
To Professor Fabio, thanks for the question. And yes, I would like more dialogue when the book comes out, and the methodology, and how the current and the past may both be similar and as well as differ. But the question is, what were some of the causes in terms of Duterte's victory. One is, I think, that he had been able to spot a major concern of the population from the elite to the masses, okay, which was crime and drugs, okay? And some people say that he was mainly running as a one-issue candidate, okay? But what is interesting is none of the other politicians, whether it's on the left, it's on the middle, the right, you know, really put that at the center. Maybe it was probably number 15 of 15 issues. And Duterte put that in front. And he put that in front, especially at a time, you know, when, you know, leading up to the elections, there was in fact highly publicized, you know, crimes being committed, you know. And he put that, you know, issue at a time that most of our television in the Philippines, if you look at the 6 o'clock news, you know, 50% of them are CCTV, okay? Break-ins, robberies, killings. CCTV really has been able to create this sense of an immediacy of crime that was not there before the era of CCTV. So I think that Duterte was smart enough to realize that you had this mass of people that sitting before television every night got their anger aroused at, look at that criminal, look at that drug dealer, look at that. So I think he was able to really capture that sentiment and then make that the driving push. But it was not only that, I think he also was able to project himself as an anti-corruption candidate. You know, that although he did not analyze corruption in a sophisticated way, his rhetoric was always that, you know, the old politics is corrupt, all these candidates are just old politicians, and I am going to clean up, you know, the system, okay? But I'm going to begin with the criminals, of course. And then thirdly is, he openly, brazenly caricatured liberal democratic ideas. He was brazenly misogynistic, okay? He said that there was a prison outbreak in my city in Davao, in a prison uprising, and they killed an Australian missionary. And I was the mayor then, and when I saw that the missionary that they had raped and killed was so beautiful, oh my God, I should have been the first to get at her. I mean, this is Duterte saying that, and his audience would clap, okay? His audience would clap. But I think that he spoke such anti-liberal language that it was perceived as him being not hypocritical. Because over the last 30 years, we have had, ever since Marcos fell, because of what we call the EDSA uprising, we have had a constitution that is probably the most human rights constitution in the world. We've had politicians all saying that democracy so and so and so, change so and so and so. So there was this liberal democratic discourse that really people felt was hypocritical because it had brought nothing but more stagnation, more poverty, and more inequality. Before the elections, the inequality Gini coefficient in the Philippines was around 50, pretty much the same as Brazil. And the poverty in the Philippines was about 25 to 28% of the population, the worst in Southeast Asia. So I think that he was able to tap into this anti-hypocrisy thing with his discourse, okay? And he has continued that. He says, okay, he told an audience over radio that, okay, you policemen who are brought to court, because you are accused of having killed the criminals without provocation, don't worry. I will make sure that I will defend you, and I will be successful. I will make you free. I will set you free, so that you can go after the people who brought you to court. You know, so this I'm just giving you a sample. You know, that he is so brazen in this discourse that many people still now find it quite refreshing because of the way that it confronts the hypocrisy of the liberal elites. You know? And so it is, as I said, you know, Duterte is not campaigning, or did not campaign really on a program. He campaigned on an image. And he campaigned on the image of a strong man who will begin with the criminals, but will end revolutionizing the whole system. And the choice before you is, you know, are you going to support me, or are you going to be against me? Okay? So, you know, his imprisonment of one of his opponents on clearly fabricated charges, Senator De Lima, is very popular. His attack on news agencies like Rappler, okay, that is also enjoying a lot of popularity. I'm not saying that everyone supports him. No, there's a significant sector of the population that is outraged at this, and we constantly engage his followers. But I think the first thing that we have to do is to accept the fact, you know, that he has a tremendous degree of interclass appeal. Although I would make a distinction between the middle class and the lower classes in the way that they relate to Duterte. Now, when it comes to the left, unfortunately, the left has not really provided a clear alternative over the last 2 decades, because part of the left has become very sectarian, and it still has this idea of surrounding the cities from the countryside, and has antagonized other sectors of the left. And so it doesn't have really much appeal at this point in time. But I think the main foil of Duterte is a liberal democratic system that has failed, you know, and that is right now in the election, coming up to the elections, that is really the way that his party has structured the situation. On the role of the state, maybe this also goes back to the question of methodology that Professor Fabio presented, because in the case of some of these studies that I have done, there were clearly distinctions between weak states and strong states. Weak liberal constitutionalist states that are unable to, in which the repressive agencies find their actions restricted, either by constitution or because they're quite really weak. They have to rely on paramilitary groups to stabilize the situation. But there are, of course, these strong states that have very strong repressive components. And while they, in the period of anti-left mobilization, civil society groups of the right, like paramilitary groups, Patria y Libertad in the case of Chile, are the ones, or the Christian Democratic Youth, are the ones that are on the forefront. Once the repressive agencies have made a decision to intervene, as in Indonesia and Chile, then they are the ones that supervise, down to the last level, the killings. And what happens in the case of Indonesia is or Patria y Libertad is, Patria y Libertad was absorbed into the DINA, the intelligence agency of the Chilean military state. And in Indonesia, the Islamic groups were manipulated and created by the right to carry out the massive massacre of communists. Most of the massacre of communists in Indonesia, which was about, some would say close to 2 million communists, was carried out by Islamic right-wing political militia, you know, but under very direct control of the military. Now, in the case of fascist Italy, I would just want to end with this example. It wasn't, you know, it was paramilitary groups, you know, that basically in 2 years they were able to clean up the whole of Italy, you know, mainly by force. After the electoral triumph of the Socialist Party in, you know, what they call the Bienio Rosso, 1918 to 1920, through fascist paramilitary violence, aided by the police and military, they were the ones who cleaned this up. And then, of course, the fascists then, you know, became the avenue as a party to Mussolini's march to Rome in 1922. So in the case of the Philippines, this is, you know, we traditionally have had a weak state when it comes to, you know, at all levels, politically, militarily, economically, and people have traditionally cited the Philippines as a weak state compared, say, to South Korea that is able to develop, you know, with the centrality of the state. But the Philippines has also been quite weak in terms militarily and the police. But when you have a figure like Duterte, who enjoys mass appeal, then he can join his strength, his populist kind of strength, to the repressive agencies of the state, and that makes a very, very strong and volatile combination. Basically, it has been the national police that has carried out, with the aid of vigilantes, these killings of 20,000 people over the last few years. Duterte, again, has a very interesting relationship to the military. He has the enlisted men in the military, but he doesn't have the officers. And for the military, the important thing to them is not to make peace with the communists, the New People's Army. And so Duterte, in fact, was quite open to having peace negotiations with the Communist Party, but the military basically told him, okay, if you do that, you know, you can't rely on our support anymore. So, interestingly, the only institution in the Philippines at this point, whether religious, civil society, government, that can form a counter to Duterte is the military. Now, that's a very, very bad situation when he has been able to subvert all the other institutions, but the military is there, and the military, some people are saying, oh, but, you know, we really need to work on the military because it's the only one that can confront Duterte. And I think that's the wrong strategy.
We have time for about 2 last questions here. Antes de passar, agradecer bastante aqui ao coletivo Vigência, aqui com o organizador Gonzalo, pessoal. Agradecer aos 2 tradutores aqui também que gentilmente se dispuseram a colaborar aqui para o evento transcorrer bem. I'm just thanking the co-organizers here and the translators here. Okay, thank you. So now.
I'll speak in English. My name is Caio. I'm a PhD student at the University of São Paulo. And I'd like to begin first answering a question you asked in your presentation about the situation in Brazil, about the involvement of the middle class. And I believe, yeah, the middle class forms the the core support of Bolsonaro here in Brazil. My PhD right now is, I'm studying this. I'm still in the early stages, but I'm interviewing core supporters from the middle class of Bolsonaro to try to understand more of why they support him, why did they campaign for him. But yeah, since 2006, we've had electoral alignment that the more wealth, the more income you had, the higher was the vote for the center-right party, that was PSDB, and the lower your income, the more you voted for the center-left party, that was PT. And suddenly, in the last elections, this changed because, well, the center-right party was obliterated in the last election, and Bolsonaro did not have more votes among the elite, but actually in the middle class. So this changed the logic. Yeah, the core support for Bolsonaro came actually from what we call this bracket between 5 to 10 minimum wages, which is really in the middle class. So it's really a change to what we had seen before, yes. But I just wanted to comment that, and luckily for us so far, I believe that Bolsonaro is not as competent and is not as skillful as Duterte or maybe other extreme right leaders. So his first few months have been so difficult for him that he has not been able to do things, that he has actually lost a lot of popularity among in the suburbs, among poorer people, because, well, we're still in an economic crisis, high unemployment, and but unfortunately, yes, he still retains his core support in the middle class. Around 30% of the population still support him. I don't have many questions because actually many of the questions I had you answered in the other questions and during your presentation. But I just have a simple question that you talked about during your presentation about this anti-crime movement in the Philippines and the killings, the 20,000 killings. You said there was an active consent from the middle classes and a passive consent from the lower classes, from the working classes. I'd like to understand, how does this passive consent work? Because I imagine they are the target of this attack of these killings, and the target, the main victims of the neoliberal policy. So how does this passive consent operate there? Thank you.
Meu nome é Matheus. I think I'm going to just speak in Portuguese, so everyone understands, and then. Então, eu queria primeiramente agradecer a tua palestra, agradecer a Taperá por abrir o... Tá funcionando? Bom, então, queria agradecer, primeiramente, a tua palestra, foi muito interessante, e a Taperá por abrir esse espaço para discussão de um tópico que é muito relevante hoje em dia. Eu tenho duas questões muito breves. Na verdade, a primeira, ela está ligada à pergunta que o colega acabou de fazer, que eu queria entender como funciona essa ação passiva, ou essa passividade das classes subalternas diante, ou das classes mais populares diante do surgimento da extrema-direita. Isso, claro, pensando um pouco em dois casos que tu menciona, mas que tu não estuda, que é o Brasil e o Reino Unido. No Brasil, a gente tem partes das classes subalternas e mais populares apoiando o Bolsonaro. Tem esse crescimento, tem um crescimento de movimentos conservadores nas periferias. Isso a gente está vendo cresci inclusive no Nordeste, que eram considerados bolsões petistas. E no Reino Unido, né, no Brexit, a gente tem regiões que eram Labour e passaram a votar no Brexit, né? Então, eu acho que tem uma participação ativa dessas. Então, eu queria entender como, um pouco mais que tu pudesse elaborar nessa passividade, né, dos casos que tu estudou. A segunda questão está ligada à ideia de populismo, porque tu mencionas bastante o populismo de direita, da extrema direita, na verdade, e que vem ali da crise de 2008, né? Mas nessa mesma crise ela dá emergência a um populismo que é chamado de esquerda, né? E exemplos a gente tem o Podemos, o próprio Syriza, que adota essa estratégia populista à la Ernesto Laclau. E a diferença de conteúdo é óbvia, mas me parece que tem muita similaridade de dinâmica e formal. Então, a questão é para ti, como é que tu vê essas diferenças desses populismos? Há alguma diferença para além do conteúdo, ou há uma diferença substancial na estruturação e dinâmica desses populismos? Muito obrigado.
Well, a couple of issues. Yes, I appreciate the comments on the, on the middle class and how, we need to really study this further, especially in terms of the way that they've been mobilized and in terms of the appeals that have been launched by, forces that were favoring Bolsonaro. So that's, the first thing. The issue of passive and active and passive consensus, I sort of got this partly from Gramsci, but it's not, I'm using it in a way that Gramsci didn't really see it, an active consensus in the way that basically, whether you see it in the surveys, what we have in the Philippines are class A, B, C, D, and E. The ABC, which is the elite and the middle classes, have the highest support for Duterte consistently. And the D and E has been fluctuating and, has been, going down. So, one is, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, in terms of the active propaganda and discourse, it is not lower class people, that you find in the trenches defending Duterte, whether it's in the internet or in public fora, or so. It is the discourse is a discourse of the middle class, okay? Emphasizing, how it is important to get rid of criminals, that the drug cartels have taken over the country, that President Duterte is not hard enough, that he needs to be harder, and then Duterte himself says, yes, I think I've been too soft, we need to be able to be harder on these criminals. So among the people who are articulating this discourse, very few of them really are coming from the lower classes. Thirdly, definitely, as you have said, how can the poor support a war that is against the poor? And the only way that I can really explain that is, that drugs have been a problem for many poor people, and that this has been, poor households also feel threatened by drugs, and that everyone in the community knows who are the drug dealers, who are the big ones, and who are the smaller ones, and so I think there is also a base, for the anti. There is also a base in the anti-drug and anti-crime campaign among the poor, and we always point this out, that it's the poor communities that are suffering, this is a class war. Okay, this is a war against the poor. Yes, it is, but we also have to realize that for many among the poor, there are supporters of this war, because it has been poor communities. Yes, they have been the ones targeted, but it is also them who have mainly suffered from the consequences of the proliferation of drugs in the Philippines. But it's really true. Hardly any middle-class person has been, killed in this war, because we would know. The press is covering this, but the vast majority of the victims are really poor people, and so that's and of course the administration is very lax when it comes to the middle class and the elite. When people are caught, they say, "Oh, these are not hard drugs. These are entertainment drugs like ecstasy." Not a big problem, okay? Now and then, of course, there is somebody, elite celebrity that is caught with ecstasy or whatever, but the authorities don't take that seriously. It's really, they really are aiming at, what they consider to be the what we call in the Philippines the shabu or methamphetamines, So. So I think that also probably is my answer to yours. There's definitely, though, a big difference between the Philippines and Brazil in the mobilization in the elections. Yes, evangelicals played some role in support of Duterte. But my sense is that it was far less than what I hear you had here in Brazil. And among the evangelicals, it is an old evangelical group that has about 3 million members, and whose people vote as their leader says. It's called the Iglesia ni Cristo, the Church of Christ. That was the most evident role of the evangelical right. That basically people even say that that was a big source of his campaign victory. But in terms of the mobilizations you found around Brazil, I don't think we really had that. The last thing I would say is that in terms of religion, again, there might be a difference here in the sense that the role of the religious groups in attacking what was what they felt was Peites subversion of the family and everything else. There's something a bit different in Duterte. Duterte has been attacking the church. Duterte has been attacking God. Duterte has basically said, you shouldn't be worshiping God, you should have a photo of me and put it up there. So he has spoken in very strong anti-religious ways, but his main target is the Catholic Church. And he thinks that the Catholic Church is the hierarchy. He thinks that if they attack him on human rights grounds, he has told them, that if you attack me on human rights grounds, the gloves are off. I will come after you. And Duterte's biggest weapon? Duterte's biggest weapon that has immobilized the church hierarchy is, I will expose who among you are child molesters. I will expose who among you have wives. Okay? I will expose this and you will see your moral authority collapse. It's been very effective. The church has been quite weak in terms of his response. And probably this is where personality begins to make a difference in terms of the way that we understand these people. Because when he was a student, at a Jesuit school, Ateneo Davao in, when he was in, I believe he was in high school. Apparently Duterte was raped by, was sexually molested by a Jesuit priest. And apparently he has carried that psychological scars into a very, very strong anti-Catholic Church kind of campaign.
If no one has further questions or demands for clarification, or I think we are well enough. We had a great conversation here, really a great moment here in our place here. We are very proud to have you here, and the level of your presentation and the very good questions we took here. Excellent questions, all of them, and we are very pleased to have hosted this event. I thank Gonzalo and the friends from Vigencia, the collective, and the translators. Again, we are very thankful for your excellent job here. And Professor, hopefully you'll be able to return to Brazil more often, and you have an open invitation to come here and visit us whenever you want. Hopefully in a better scenario. Hopefully we can, in a few years, discuss some good developments, but the situation is very difficult. Thank you, Professor. Thank you.